Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at a really interesting puzzle, actually. Why does it seem like, well, everyone's suddenly reading Tolstoy or something?
Right.
While our attention spans are supposedly, fried and literacy rates aren't exactly soaring?
It's a fascinating contradiction, isn't it? You hear all this talk about shrinking attention, phone addiction, and yet there's this definite trend of people engaging with, or maybe more accurately, appearing to engage with serious reading.
Exactly. And what sort of kicked this off for us was a really sharp YouTube video. It's from the channel Charlichats called Performative Reading Has Become a Status Symbol.
Yeah.
It just really got us thinking about what's actually behind this. So our goal today, our mission, if you like, is to try and unpack the why this apparent resurgence in reading.
And what does it tell us about how we think about information, maybe our social standing?
Our well-being, even in this whole digital age mess.
Yeah, exactly. And the video, it jumps right in with examples you've probably seen, or you can definitely picture them.
Oh, totally. Think about those images, right? Timothy Chalamet snapped holding some feminist text, or Kaya Gerber launching her own very chic book club, Library Science.
Right.
And I mean, who hasn't maybe gotten that pointed Joan Didion quote sent by, let's just say, a former acquaintance? It feels different, a new kind of signal.
It does. And then you've got this other interesting thing, this sort of migration of influencers, maybe towards platforms like Substack.
Yeah. Embracing that longer form writing.
Which suggests maybe a shift in what people see as, valuable or authentic online.
But here's the real head scratcher. This apparent coolness, this elevation of reading. It's happening when, as the video points out pretty clearly, there are real worries about literacy levels. And let's be honest, the struggle to just put the phone down feels more intense than ever. So that brings us right to the core question, I think. Is this genuine? Are people actually diving into these big books? Or have the act of reading, or maybe just the image of it, become this new way to signal something about yourself?
That idea of performative reading, the video really digs into that.
It does. And it connects it back, interestingly, to a TikTok mentioned early on.
Oh, yeah. What was that again?
The idea, kind of provocative, that maybe soon just not having an online presence, not being constantly plugged in.
That'll be the real status symbol, a signifier of wealth.
Exactly. It's a really interesting place to start thinking about all this.
It really is. And the video starts to kind of build this case for renewed interest in long form, pointing to some, maybe unexpected evidence.
Like what?
Well, things like, even though big media outlets have cut back on print, some are actually bringing back smaller print runs, niche things maybe.
Okay. So there's still a value placed on the physical object, the tangible thing. It seems like it. But what's really fascinating and maybe a bit concerning is the cost and exclusivity that seems to be creeping into being offline.
Oh, so.
The video mentions this course in Brooklyn, 6 weeks long, $600.
$600. Wow.
Yeah. And it's all focused on helping people reclaim their attention, use their phones less. But that price tag, straight away, it tells you who can actually afford to disconnect like that.
Right. It immediately makes being offline a kind of luxury good.
Precisely.
And then you layer on top of that Kaya Gerber's comment in British Vogue earlier this year. She actually said reading is so sexy.
She did. Wow.
Yeah, talking about her book club, Library Science. It just taps right into this idea of reading, not just being smart, but being, desirable.
Yeah.
Trendy, even.
Which, interestingly, kind of lines up with some actual data the video pulls out from The Guardian, I think.
Yeah. What did it say?
That physical book sales in the UK in 2023 hit a record high, 669 million copies.
669 million. That's huge.
Yeah.
Especially when you think about how dominant digital stuff is supposed to be. It is huge. And here's another kicker for you. Nielsen book data showed that Gen Z, they're driving a lot of this.
Gen Z, really? Not millennials or older folks?
Apparently, yeah. They accounted for something like 80% of print book purchases in the UK between late 2021 and 2022.
Wow. Okay, so that definitely challenges the stereotype of younger generations only being interested in screens.
It really does. And there's a reported 71% increase in Gen Z library visits over there.
Libraries. Okay, that's interesting.
The video suggests maybe it points to, younger people wanting quieter spaces, focused environment, maybe getting away from the noise of coffee shops or just online life.
A refuge from the digital storm.
Could be. Which leads us nicely into the whole celebrity angle, right?
Yeah,
the famous people suddenly being seen with books. This is where that performance idea really comes into play.
Oh, yeah. Harry Styles, Jacob Elordi, Kendall Jenner, Addison Rae with that Britney Spears book photo.
That one is everywhere.
And Timothy Chalamet again. You definitely see more celebs being snapped with a the book in hand.
And the video sort of touches on that feeling you get sometimes. That's slightly knowing, almost we're all in on this feeling.
Yeah, like it's maybe a bit staged.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like when you see Addison Rae seemingly engrossed in Britney's memoir paparazzi style, there's this kind of shared understanding, isn't there, that the photo itself, the image, might be the main point.
But then the video also mentions Kendall Jenner on a yacht, but her book looked like it was actually annotated, marked up.
Right. So it muddies the waters a bit.
Right.
Where does the genuine interest stop and the carefully crafted image start? It's hard to tell.
It is. But regardless, all this visibility, it definitely contributes to this idea of being a bookworm as a kind of desirable persona now.
Yeah, like a marker of identity, perceived intelligence.
Definitely. And that perception bit is key, I think. The video quotes Terry Newman from the New York Times.
What did Newman say?
Something about how, in our digital world, books can function like clothes or cars did, as signals of your taste, your aesthetic, your intellectual vibe.
Ah, okay. So there's a social currency attached to appearing well-read.
Seems like it. And it's not just physical books either. The video points to the growth of platforms like Substack.
Right, the long-form stuff online?
Yeah, noting they had, 35 million users and 3 million paid subscribers late last year. That suggests a real appetite, at least among some people, for more in-depth content, even online.
That's a good point. And the creator of the video, charlichats, makes a kind of optimistic point, too.
Oh, yeah.
Basically saying, look, maybe any reading, even if it starts out performative, could actually be a positive thing if it gets people choosing books over their phones sometime.
That's fair. Like maybe the aesthetic leads to the actual habit for some.
Could happen. There's a hopeful angle there.
Absolutely. But we keep circling back to this central tension, right? This embrace of reading happening alongside, declining literacy rates and rising phone addiction. It just feels like a clash.
It really does. Are we actually getting people reading more deeply, improving literacy overall? Or are we just getting better at showcasing the image of reading?
Which leads us into this whole discussion of brain rot culture, which, kind of amazingly, was the Oxford Word of the Year.
Right. And the video gives this really interesting historical context for it. It's not just a new TikTok thing.
No, it goes way back, apparently.
Yeah.
To 1854. Henry David Thoreau in Walden.
Thoreau? Seriously?
Yeah, criticizing what he saw as the oversimplification of complex stuff in British culture back then. He basically used a similar idea.
Wow. Okay, so the anxiety about shallow content isn't new. But what's interesting now is how Gen Z and Gen Alpha seem to use the term brain rot.
Almost cheekily. Self-aware.
Exactly. To describe the very stuff they make and watch on social media. There's this weird acknowledgement of its potential downsides.
And the link to the addictive nature of social media is unavoidable here. The video brings in Dr. Julie Albright from USC.
What's her take?
She makes this really powerful comparison between TikTok's algorithm, that unpredictable reward system, and slot machines, how they hook you in the same way.
Oof. Yeah, that random reinforcement thing. And there was a brain scan study too, right? Chinese students using a TikTok-like app.
Yeah, showing activity in the brain regions linked to addiction. Pretty compelling evidence.
And when you look at the usage stats, average 95 minutes a day on TikTok.
95 minutes.
And the optimal video length for engagement is something like 21 to 34 seconds. You do the math, that could be, 160, 270, maybe even more TikToks a day.
It's just constant fragmented input. It's hard to see how deep thinking or processing complex info fits into that.
Totally. And that bean soup theory anecdote the video mentions.
Oh, yeah. Explain that one.
It's basically this idea that people get so used to algorithms feeding them exactly what they want that when something slightly off appears, like getting bean soup videos when you don't like bean soup, the reaction is almost outrage. Like, how dare the algorithm not know me perfectly?
Right. It suggests we're maybe developing this expectation of perfect curation, which could narrow what we're exposed to.
Could definitely narrow our informational diet. And then you have the actual literacy stats, which are, pretty sobering.
Jonathan Haidt's piece in The Atlantic, End the Phone-Based Childhood. And the nation's report card data in the U.S. showing reading and math scores declining after 2012, right when social media really took off.
And it's not just the U.S. The PISA data, the international measure, shows similar global declines in math, reading, science, starting around the early 2010s.
And that stat from Australia, the National Literacy Trust, only a third of 8 to 18-year-olds want to read in their spare time. Lowest ever. Halved since 2016. That's worrying.
It really is. And the video makes a crucial point that these declines often hit marginalized communities harder, potentially making existing inequalities even worse.
And just practically, if you're spending 95 minutes on TikTok, that's 95 minutes you're not spending reading or doing homework or just thinking.
Exactly. The time has to come from somewhere.
But it's interesting that the terms themselves, chronically online, brain rot show there's this widespread awareness, right? People know too much social media is.
Yeah, there's this definite feeling of wanting to log off, wanting to disconnect.
But it's hard. Because everything is so integrated now. Work, social life, news.
It really is. But maybe that difficulty, that awareness, is fueling a craving for something more substantial, something beyond the quick dopamine hits.
A recognition that maybe nuance gets lost in 20-second videos.
Possibly. The video touches on how oversimplification can have real-world consequences, too. Elections being a prime example.
Yeah, complex issues get boiled down into memes or sound bites. Scary stuff.
And even though everyone talks about digital detox for mental health,
actually doing it is tough, which, again, maybe makes the act of being offline, including reading, seem more aspirational, more virtuous even.
Which brings us nicely to this idea of pseudointellectualism. The video explores this as maybe another way to understand the trend.
Explain that a bit.
It's basically, positioning yourself as knowledgeable as an expert, maybe without having the actual deep understanding or qualifications.
Like the TikTok expert who watched one documentary and now explains quantum physics.
Exactly like that. And the video is careful to distinguish that from, say, valuable personal experience or just sharing an opinion.
Right. Anecdotes can be useful.
But the danger is absorbing bits of unverified info from somewhere like TikTok and then presenting it as fact, as authoritative knowledge.
Yeah.
It's easy to do in that kind of environment.
And that connects right back to the shift from actually reading to the aesthetic of reading, doesn't it?
Totally. The creator, Charlichats, mentions hiding being a bookworm back in the early 2000s because it wasn't seen as cool.
Which feels almost funny now because the perception seems to have flipped completely.
Right. Carter wrote about this on Substack too, how in the 90s, being called a nerd for reading was definitely negative. But now, Carter suggests appearing to be a reader might have sort of overshadowed the actual reading itself.
So the image is more important than the subject.
That's the argument, yeah. Though it's nuanced. The video reminds us bookishness wasn't always uncool in pop culture.
True. Like Hugh Grant in Notting Hill or Rory Gilmore.
Will Hunting.
Yeah.
Yeah. There were characters where being smart and curious was part of their appeal.
But generally, I guess, society links reading with academic intelligence, right?
Yeah.
And that's usually valued, especially in capital.
For sure. And if literacy rates are potentially declining, maybe the perception of having that academic quality becomes even more desirable, more aspirational.
That makes sense. And that Atlantic article about elite college students, the one saying they struggle with reading loads.
Yeah, what about it?
It adds another layer. Professors at top universities saying students are unwilling or unable to handle the assigned reading, struggling with classics like Pride and Prejudice or Crime and Punishment.
Wow. So it's not just about wanting to read, but maybe ability and time constraints too.
Exactly. The article links it to potentially lower literacy and just a lack of time for that kind of deep engagement.
Which leads perfectly into the whole class and leisure time dimension.
Yeah, this resonates personally. I remember in law school, the reading load was insane. And if you were also working part-time or full-time, finding time for pleasure reading felt impossible, a total luxury.
And that's likely even more true now. With the cost of living crisis forcing more students to work more hours, spare time just shrinks.
So activities that need a lot of free time, like digging into a dense novel, they can kind of unintentionally become associated with people who have more time, which often means more financial stability.
It becomes a subtle class marker, maybe. The video even brings up Thorstein Veblen.
Oh, theory of the leisure class. It's been a while since I thought about that.
Yeah. His idea that conspicuously showing you have spare time, doing things that aren't strictly productive, like learning Latin back in the day, or maybe now spending hours reading philosophy.
It's a way of flexing your status, showing you don't have to be constantly working, that lavish expenditure of time.
Exactly. Which circles us right back to that TikTok that sparked the discussion. Kayla's video saying, not being online constantly will be the new flex.
And she mentioned that Atlantic piece by Caitlin Tiffany about the $600 digital detox course in Brooklyn.
Right, reinforcing how exclusive these offline experiences can be.
And Zara from Taboo on the Bus adds that point about rarity giving things value.
How does that fit in?
Well, if everyone is online, then being online loses its cachet. It's common. So being off-grid becomes the rarer, more desirable, more luxurious state.
Like those expensive Airbnb cabins marketed specifically for having no Wi-Fi.
Precisely. It's selling disconnection as a premium product.
So you've got this really stark contrast. Very public displays of celebrities reading, seemingly making it cool.
Happening at the exact same time as real concerns about literacy and inescapable phone addiction. It's like two different realities coexisting.
And maybe experienced very differently depending on your circumstances, your resources.
Which brings us to the last big theme the video explores, health and wellness.
How does that connect?
Well, being offline, reading a book, it fits neatly into the whole digital detox narrative, which is framed as being good for your mental health.
Okay, yeah, that makes.
And Gen Z, despite growing up online, they're also described as being super aware of the downsides, the mental toll of being chronically online.
Right. They seem quite tuned into mental health discussion.
And they're also seen as a very health-conscious generation generally. There was a McKinsey study mentioned showing they buy more wellness stuff, products, services than older.
Interesting. So wellness is a big market for them.
Huge. But the video raises a good question. Is the focus sometimes more on the appearance of health?
What do you mean? Like the aesthetic?
Yeah. Like the perfectly arranged smoothie bowls for Instagram, the fancy supplements, the red light masks, those that girl routines. Is it about being healthy or looking healthy?
The commodification, I see.
So the question becomes, is this performative reading, this visible offlineness, just another part of that wellness aesthetic, another way to signal I'm taking care of myself, I'm balanced?
That's a really interesting angle. And maybe the pandemic amplified that health focus for Gen Z, made those kinds of wellness signals more visible, more aspirational.
Could be. And even digital detox itself, as we said, is becoming commodified. Expensive retreats, digital detox tourism. It's packaging the absence of digital life as a luxury wellness experience.
It all seems to point towards valuing the image of a healthy, balanced, maybe even intellectual life, which might not always match the reality.
So, yeah, we've kind of come full circle, haven't we? Back to this core tension, this really intriguing thing happening, performative reading, maybe a genuine desire for longer form stuff.
Clashing against these very real problems with literacy, attention spans, phone addiction.
It's complex, and it's worth remembering the potential upside, like you mentioned earlier.
Right. If looking like a reader actually makes someone read more, well, maybe that's not entirely bad.
Yeah, you think about Book Talk. It's an online platform, very visual, but it demonstrably gets people, especially young people, excited about buying and reading actual books.
That's true. It shows how these things can be complicated, not just purely negative.
Definitely. But ultimately, this whole deep dive, sparked by the charlichats video, it leaves us with some pretty big questions, I think.
Like, who actually can disconnect? Who has the time, the resources, the privilege, really, to be truly offline or engage deeply with long books or articles?
And what does this whole trend, the coolness of reading, the performance of it really say about what we value now, what we aspire to in this?
Yeah, it leaves you with a lot to chew on about your own relationship with information, with being online, with how we present ourselves.
So maybe the final thought for everyone listening is just that. Think about your own balance, your own mix of online and offline. Are you really engaging deeply? Or is there maybe an element of performance, even just for yourself and how you consume things?
And what does your own balance, or maybe, let's be honest, imbalance, tell you about these bigger cultural currents we've been talking about today? Definitely something to keep mulling over.